Welcome to Viewpoints with Brenda. I'm your host, Brenda Ntambirwechi, and on this podcast, you'll hear plenty of conversations with African professionals, change makers, innovators, influencers, and entrepreneurs from all sectors. On today's podcast, we're talking about election reporting in Uganda, how it's changed, and what it takes to do well. Today's guest is Daniel Kalinaki, a veteran Ugandan journalist, editor, and author known for his sharp political commentary and long career in East African media. He started reporting as a teenager and has led major newsrooms at the Nation Media Group. His writing explores politics, governance, and social change in Uganda. He's also the author of Kiza Besige and Uganda's Unfinished Revolution, a book that examines Uganda's political struggles. Daniel, it's good to have you here.
Thanks for having me, Brenda.
So you've reported through several election cycles. From your first election cycle to your most recent, what has changed most about how elections are covered in Uganda?
First, it's the thing that hasn't changed. It's remarkable to think that I saw the 96 election. I didn't actively cover that. Had half a leg in media, but I didn't cover that. I just witnessed it. But then I've covered the election since then. And it's remarkable that from 2001 to 2025, we've had President Museveni on the ballot, and he's been on in 96 as well. The most remarkable thing, first and foremost, is the constant rather than the change. The fact that Museveni has been on the ballot all that time. On the other side of the fence, there's been both constants and change. So in 2006, 11, and 16, you had as a constant feature on the other side, primarily over the last 25 years, Besige, and then you have other characters that come in about. In 96, you had Semogere, who represented the old parties, Democratic Party. Those kind of still feature every now and then. Norbert Mao has run a couple of times, but they have really been decimated and subsumed under the NRM, as has the UPC. Those were the kind of the traditional parties. So you have the NRM as the dominant party, and then you have an opposition wave that primarily was FDC for a long time, but now has morphed into NUP. Most of these tend to be referenda against the sitting government rather than an articulation of an alternative ideology. In a nutshell, there's been a lot of moving pieces, but the underlying foundation, I think, remains the same.
And when campaign season heats up and the noise gets loud, how do you decide which stories you're going to report on?
There is a normative sense of what elections ought to be, especially if you've grown up kind of consuming Western media and Western political tradition, where you think that an election is an opportunity for rival parties and candidates to articulate alternative agenda. And then the audience getting to hear and make an informed decision on what they say. In our case, there's been a bit of that. You can see, for instance, when Semogere speaks of free education, then it becomes government policy in 98. So it's picked up and taken. When Besige speaks of abolishing graduated tax, it then gets abolished after his first run. It's true that there is a bit of policy contestation and ideas that then get implemented because they've been promised or threatened by political rivals. However, then the dominant thing is that the elections are really a contest between the civilian political practice and the military substructure or superstructure of Uganda. And that both in terms of the fact that President Museveni, who's been in power since 86, he does not come into power through an election. He comes into power by winning a military conflict. It is fair to say that over the last 40 years, the elections have been, to a large extent, Probably sanitizing is too extreme a word, but there's a bit of a ritualistic thing to renew the underlying military control that put him in power in the first place. So it's different from someone who wins an election and then has to justify himself to the electorate. There is a case in which the NRA and NRM installs itself in power and then plays to the democratic traditions and practices, but the core of its control of the state is, I think, military. So that then shows itself in political violence, 2001 in particular, then there was 2006, a bit of 2011, then we had walk-to-walk protests that followed. So the military is never far from the political arena during elections in Uganda, and violence. So violence and the militarization then becomes a key factor of Ugandan elections.
And just given how much influence the ruling party has over the media space, how does balance look like in terms of reporting? Because obviously there are certain news houses that will always print pro-government, and there are certain others that may be perceived as anti-government, which might not be the case. It may just be a bit more balanced. But what does balance look like?
There are kind of three blends from a media point of view. You have the broadcasters. In the case of Uganda, that's UBC and its satellite broadcast stations. And the idea behind public broadcasters is that they give an unfiltered view of the world, and then people take and add to that their own kind of opinions. Then you have the private media houses, which in theory should articulate their own views, their own independent take on things, but many of them are either owned by people who have links to the state, either politicians, or primarily survive on advertising and regulatory permissions that are granted by the state. So many of them tend to toe the line. And then you have a hybrid, which is probably Vision Group, which is both majority state owned but also listed on the stock exchange. The major private shareholder is NSSF, which is a government kind of run entity that does not really challenge the conventional wisdom. So the New Vision then ends up being much closer to the government official point of view than one would expect of a listed media house. So in that kind of landscape, the media houses that don't toe the line very easily get called opposition or get painted by the brush of opposition. Nation Media Group, and Monitor, which where I've spent most of my time, we've never really endorsed, actually. We don't have a policy of endorsing candidates. Because there's so many outlets that are giving the official version of things, there's a natural instinct to tell the other story, tell the other side of the story. That then leaves you as outliers. I'll tell you one of the interesting stories. In the 2006 election, this is when Besigye has come back from exile and he's running as a presidential candidate, but he's also facing charges of rape and treason and misprision of treason. So there's a meeting that is called in Entebbe by some people working for the state, and they bring in the big shots from Nairobi who are in charge of the Nation Media Group and the Monitor by extension. And they show them these headlines. And they say the Monitor is biased in favor of Besigye because they're showing this is the headline, this is the headline, this is the headline. And there's an avalanche of headlines. Besigye is the main headline of the newspaper. And of course, it's very uncomfortable. There's a lot of scrumming in seats and clearing of throats. Some people say, okay, we're going to look at this again. But they've been ambushed, so they hadn't had a chance to prepare. So when they step back and review the evidence, it turns out that, yes, Besigye had a lot more headlines on the Monitor than Museveni, who was the incumbent. But the Besigye headlines were mostly about his legal troubles. So it was about Besigye arrested, Besigye denied bail, Besigye remanded. So on the one hand, you had the government thinking that the Monitor was giving Besigye undue coverage. But the Besigye camp, on the other hand, were actually very unhappy with the Monitor because they said Besigye was running as a candidate and he had a manifesto, he had an agenda, but all that the Monitor was covering was his rape case, his treason case. In a nutshell, that kind of captures the sense that you can't win. From experience now, I think if you're running a media house, an independent media house in a place like Uganda, I think the measure of success is when all camps are unhappy with you. If you get to a point whereby there is a camp that says, oh, we're very happy with your coverage, you're doing something wrong.
You've often been in those situations where there's an expectation of positive coverage. How have you kept access without losing independence?
Coverage speaks for itself. When the government launches a new road, when the government inaugurates a new power dam, when the government opens a new airport terminal building, those things speak for themselves, and any media house that doesn't cover them is doing an injustice to its audience. The world is not all doom and gloom. There are positive things, and people actually genuinely want some good news served as part of the menu. But there's a distinction between giving positive news where it's earned and glossing over things. So when the government, for instance, launches a dam, if you don't cover it, there's legitimate grounds to call you out for not being balanced. But what happens when you discover that there are cracks in the dam, or that there were issues with the contractors and they did not do everything according to spec? Where does the patriotism lie? Is it in saying that if we publish these details, we are going to create unnecessary panic and investors are not going to come because they think the dam is going to be washed away? Or is it in saying that there is a problem and it needs to be fixed? We've always taken the view that calling out things is an important thing, particularly because there's lots of people who are doing the glossing over, which is the state broadcaster, the hybrid private / kind of government-leaning media houses. And we need someone to call things out. There's a point to be made about being a bit nuanced on some things. So if there's a disease outbreak, if there's an Ebola outbreak, if you report about it, it's going to send tourists scampering. Obviously, no one is going to book a safari if they're coming into an Ebola-infested country. But are you then not endangering the lives of people, including locals, if you don't say that there's an Ebola outbreak? I don't think there are easier answers to it, but I think the role of media is to tell the truth, however uncomfortable it is, and hope that those in power then can respond to that reality. So elections bring out the worst in people because people become very prickly. Even people that traditionally are very reasonable, there's an industry that emerges to just take advantage of things, real and imagined. So the people were timing how long the opposition story was, how many times the bulletin started with an opposition story as opposed to the incumbent story, the size of crowds. Photographers have 6 months every 5 years when they're the most important people. The fascination with crowds. So you have maybe today you have a picture of a big crowd and everyone is happy that you have a crowd. Then the next day you have another picture, but it shows young kids. So then you're not showing a big crowd, you're allegedly showing that they've ferried young school kids to a rally. If there was a way of just not covering crowds, in another life I would simply say, just don't have a crowd picture. Just let the crowd manifest at the ballot box. The other thing that is unique to our circumstance in Uganda is at least contemporarily speaking, you've had a government that's been in power for 40 years, and then you have people trying to get into government. So you can't compare governance records. You can't say that if the Americans, for instance, the Democrats can say during the Obama years, they did the following things and they either worked or they didn't work. The Republicans can say under President Bush, etc. In Uganda, you only have the NRM's record for 40 years. So in terms of just critical coverage of policies that have worked or not worked, it's only one-sided. For the opposition, you can only measure the promises, but there's no record that they've been running against. And that then makes it much harder to bring the balanced. And so you end up with only one tool as a hammer. And then you're looking around at the record of the government of the day, and inevitably you're probably hitting a few more points than you actually want to.
And maybe that's why these comparisons with the governments of the 80s and the 70s now coming up.
Exactly. So because you can't say that under the FDC government, they did the following things. People then reach further back and they're looking at Obote 1 and the infrastructure development there. Increasingly, people are re-examining Idi Amin with probably more favorable lenses, especially when things that were demonized under his time, the disappearances, the kidnaps, then begin manifesting. When we speak about war, we're old enough to have witnessed the NRA war, had the guns, we've seen the war in northern Uganda. Younger people, for them, Idi Amin is a storybook thing, right? And it's easier for them to come and re-examine his record without the trauma of having lived experience. I think that's a very good point, that we're now looking at older governments to try and put them in the same pedestal, at least as a comparator with the NRM.
Yeah. So in times where you maybe found pushback on reporting, how do you decide when a story is worth a kind of risk to publish, or when do you decide to step back?
If there was a formula for that, it was like an algorithm where you just feed in the facts and then it lights up and tells you, go, don't go, that would be very popular. Look, experience helps in the sense that some things you will know, or you can anticipate the kind of reaction they're going to draw. Things around the military, the things around the first family, the things that will probably tend to draw a higher reaction, a more disproportionate reaction from those in power. And then other times there are things that you think are relatively harmless, and then you discover that what you thought was harmless was actually an extension of maybe those things. So experience helps. And then big stories don't really always land like a volcano. There will be tremors. You report something and then you will see the reaction. So sometimes you will report what you think is a small story. It's on page 7. Then the reaction is disproportionate. And then you think there is something here. The question then is, do you look deeper into that, or do you then say, okay, this is not go? I would say just experience and lining up the ducks and doing deeper reporting. As uncomfortable as the story might be, if the facts are correct, then the pushback is on things like the timing, the prominence of the story. If you get the facts wrong, or if you don't have the right context, then you've opened yourselves up to a lot more, this is inaccurate, this is fake, this is made up. So if you get the facts right, you get a right of reply, you have proper context and background, and then you play it maturely, you read the room. Usually you're able to get away with many things.
Social media. Obviously, this has changed how everyone in the world, not only in Uganda, is about politics, and also it's changing how journalists are working. How has this made reporting easier or more complicated?
Social media has basically changed the rules of the game. So I'll give you an example. Many years ago, if the president wrote a letter awarding a contract or something, there was a 1 week, 2 week window as it made its way from mountaintop down to the executioners, and then it got leaked along the way. Sometimes the leaks came in the middle of a meeting, so there is maybe a high command meeting, and then as soon as it ends, you get details of what was discussed. Today, stuff gets leaked on social media. President will post his own letter to social media within minutes of signing it off. So the most obvious thing is that the things that people consider to be news, or the value add that journalists traditionally had, which is finding this stuff and publishing it, has disappeared because things will go out on social media. On the other hand, though, the value then of explaining why those things matter and why they're important has actually risen. Anyone can pick a document, anyone can post something, so everyone is a journalist today. Not everyone can join the dots and show that this person who's been awarded this contract was the same guy that failed to deliver on the other contract, or this company is owned by the same people that actually won the other contract. So there's a lot more work that has then emerged in terms of just getting the details together. Social media has just dismantled attention spans, just given so much information that people have too much choice, or an incredible amount of choice. So the ability to sustain interest in something that is important is a bit under challenge at the moment. We used to be able to pick up a story and say, this is an important story, we're going to go to town with this. It could be Temangalo and NSSF, and we decide we're going to spend 2 weeks getting to the bottom of this story. Today, in the morning, there's something. If you take a flight, by the time you land, there's another thing. Take a nap, and then there's something. So the whole idea of what's trending, it's created an attention economy among the audience. And journalists, we're struggling to retain attention to the things that we think matter. There is now manipulation, I think, of the public discourse, where it's very easy to just introduce something into the market that then channels attention away from really important things. So one of the things that we struggle and need to find a way is, how do we allow people to expend their time and energies on the trending stuff, but at the end of the day come back to the things that really we think are important to them and important to the society.
During the last election, there was an internet blackout. Do you feel that people are a bit more prepared this time if this is to happen again?
The internet blackout, first and foremost, it wasn't unexpected. People forget that before the internet blackout, there was actually the banning of, which actually remains officially banned in Uganda, right? If you think about it, at that point it was the biggest social media network, still quite massive, and then just got banned. So we saw it coming, and the real impact of that has never really been told. The election happened in darkness. They said democracy dies in darkness, and it went from just a slogan to something that there you are, and you don't know what is happening pretty much around you. Since then, there's been technology, things like Starlink, which is still not allowed in Uganda. I think they will be allowed after the election, from what we hear. So there are technological workarounds if you must get access to the internet, but they're not a substitute. The internet works because it's crowdsourced. So someone in Chenjojo sees ballot stuffing, they take a video and then they share it. If you're a media house, for instance, and somehow you have access to the internet, but you don't have access to this guy in Chenjojo who has a video of ballot stuffing, then one, it's not very useful, right? It probably will emerge a month later when the internet is back on. But by that point, it's all over bar the shouting, right? So rather than look for workarounds, we need to find a way of forcing the issue, like allowing the internet to remain on. There's no justification for internet shutdown that happened then and that might happen again. If you genuinely believe that you're winning an election, I think you need to be seen to be winning the election. It's not enough for the lights to go out and then they come back on after a week and then you're the one at the podium being declared the winner. It's a bit dubious.
Yeah. And it's also a bit nearsighted in the sense that there's so many other things that need the internet to run. It's just not the election happening.
It's interesting you say that because, for instance, and I didn't know this until after the Facebook closure. Facebook was closed because some people working for the government were caught running this bot farm. It was a case of just being embarrassed and punishing the platform for calling them out. But as it turned out, there were very many young people who were running businesses on Facebook. That entire ecosystem, people who then, instead of having to lock up capital in renting a store in a building downtown, they could run an e-commerce site, they could run a delivery thing. Many of them got caught out by that, and then they went into COVID. Now, post-COVID, there's a lot more digital business that's gone online. You can order all manner of things online. So I shudder to imagine what would happen if there was a shutdown of the internet, prolonged shutdown. Definitely mobile money found themselves in trouble. The airlines, you can't book flights. It's not the kind of thing you want to be known for. When you look at the countries that shut down the internet, they're not countries that you really want to go on holiday to.
Absolutely. Yeah, it was a bit of a stain on that election. My last question for you is, if you could reshape the environment for election reporting, laws, institutions, newsroom culture, what do you think would be the one change that would make the biggest difference?
Media and newsrooms reflect the state of play in the society. And if you really want to change the way the media cover politics and elections in Uganda, you're going to have to change politics and elections in Uganda. I'm not alone in believing that the quality of the political class has diminished on both sides of the aisle, and by extension, the quality of policy making, of public debate. If you ask what are the main issues that Ugandans need to be dealing with today, and whether those are reflected. So there are things like jobs, the quantity and the quality of jobs, and getting young people to work, urban planning, public transport. Even if you take something as basic as the traffic jams, just how long it takes you to cover a kilometer on a regular commute in Kampala. These are important things that affect day-to-day life, but they're not the subject of sustained discussion because the political class is either insulated from them in their convoys or just wheeler dealing or frightened. No one wants to stick their neck out. I don't remember the last time someone brought a progressive private members bill, for instance, like we had with the little Onapito and Montu, things about the size of government and just decommercializing politics in the country, the quality of education and education outcomes, the quality of health. If those things are not happening in practice and they're not the subject of discussion in parliament, in policy-making spaces, then the media then follow the whole heckling. You tend to spend more time on crowd sizes, on who's won the NUP ticket, on who's won which primary, as opposed to the policies and why these people should be elected or not elected. If the quality of the clay is poor, then the quality of the pottery will be poor as well. And my worry is that the people coming into the media industry, because of the challenges within the industry itself, many smart young people are choosing not to come into journalism. Also because of just the whole pressure of financial, political violence. So you're getting a lower quality at the entry point, and then they come in and they find that the things that they're covering are not that intellectually stimulating. If you sit through Parliament on a typical day, you're listening to members of Parliament who are voting on things they've not read. If you look at cabinet itself and, the quality of people in cabinet and what they say when they go out into the public, if you then go into the technocrats, the civil service and the public servants, just the quality of argument and the clarity of thinking. We need to get more people in politics who don't need to be in politics. Too many career politicians. I think we need to get people who have made a living, who've built careers outside, especially private sector people, who understand competence, planning, transition, to come into the technocratic space and the political space to give direction to the country. Let me end with kind of an anecdote so right now, UEDCL, the power distributor, has, at the time where we're taping this, has taken the mantle of Umeme, the former kind of private sector distributor, as the least popular utility, safely to say. And with good measure, people expect that when you turn the lights on, the lights should be on, etc., etc. If you live in other countries, even if you live in Ireland, I don't remember the last time you flipped the switch and the power was out. So people are entitled to complain when they get home and they can't have a warm bath because the power's out or the lights are out. But that's not the biggest problem. Is that right now we have a surplus of electricity. We have installed capacity of about 2,500 megawatts. It's more than we can actually use. But the demand is growing by about 14% per annum. I've seen projections that show that in maybe 7-8 years, we'll probably max out whatever is being generated at the moment. But we don't have a major dam under construction. And it takes us a minimum of 10 years to build a dam. And that's presupposing you don't have the disputes between contractors. So everyone is focused on the fact that you don't have power in the socket because some loose cable has not been fixed, etc. But at least the power is there. So the problem right now is that some drunkard has wrapped his car around a pole and you don't have power in your house. It's different when there's no power. It's different when the demand is 3,000 and the supply is 2,000. That's what you get with load shedding, right? No one is talking about the fact that you don't have a power dam under construction. No one is talking about the things that are going to deliver impact in 20 years or in 30 years. Everyone is revolving around 5-year electoral cycles and 12-month financial year cycles. And that's, I think, one of the biggest problems in Uganda today, because everyone is just living in survival mode. For the country to thrive, you need to move beyond just trying to survive.
Daniel, thank you so much for coming to Viewpoints. I appreciate your sharp and grounded look at what election reporting should be, and obviously your experience with reporting over the years.
Thanks for having me. I think next time you should tape this in Kampala so that you're closer to the action. I think you need to come back and run for political office.
A lot of people have the will. The challenge is opportunity. There's just no gap, even if you wanted to participate in some way.
I think we need to go around it the other way. And I hear you. People have burnt their fingers coming and trying to run as member of parliament and finding that there's a pipeline. We've been targeting that position for 10 years and whatever. We need to start running for things like LC1.
True.
We need to start maybe even mobilizing people around kind of village level. It's political, but it's not partisan elective politics, because we're not going to make it with careerists in politics.
I appreciate your time. And thank you very much.
Thanks for having me, Brenda.
Thank you for listening to Viewpoints with Brenda. To keep the conversation going, follow us on Instagram at Viewpoints by BN and follow me on Twitter at Kasabiti. That's KASABIITI. To hear more conversations like this, follow the podcast, subscribe, like, and feel free to leave us a rating. See you next time.